Action.
What's up, guys? I'm Josh.
I'm Scott.
And we are Keystroke Medium, and this is The Writing Stuff, or The Right Stuff, Episode 2, Scene Relevance. Welcome.
All right, good deal. I think, hope those sound levels are okay. We are recording, so that's good. All right. Topic for the day is keeping our scenes relevant. I think last week we were talking, I'd asked for ideas, and you came up with like 15 of them. So
that's what I do.
Yeah, we should be set up for a while on what they are. So let's see. Real quick, yesterday we talked about, let's start before we get on to keeping the scene relevant. The first thing is, what is a scene? I know I've had up on my bulletin board here, you can't see it, a bunch of big giant note cards that I made a while back. And one of them in big red Sharpie, it says, a scene is where something happens, a scene is where something changes, and a scene is related to the central theme of the book. And I think that is from a book called Blueprint Your Bestseller by Stuart Horwitz, but I'm not sure. I can't remember. I have so many writing notes on my wall that it's hard to remember where I got them all from. But but it's pretty standard definition of a scene. You have anything else that you think of when you're thinking of a scene, or
you know, when I think of a scene, it's like the most basic part of a book or anything, like a movie or whatever. And everybody, there are some people that talk about, oh, I wrote a chapter today, or I wrote a chapter here, or I wrote 5 chapters today, and I wonder, how many scenes did you write? Because scenes,
so how many scenes in a chapter?
Yeah, scenes is what makes the book. So when you talk about how many scenes did you write, and how many of those scenes actually matter to the overall plot of the book?
Right. Well, and I had seen and read that basically a chapter can be one scene, a chapter can be a whole bunch of scenes. You know, and like we said, we're talking about the scene's got to advance your story. So,
right.
I guess a scene could be like a small story in of itself, just the way I'm thinking. But a lot of times you might have a scene that starts off with a hook, or ends with a cliffhanger to drive you on to the next chapter. Obviously, with the last scene in a section, or like part 1, you got the 3-act structure: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. You want some resonance towards the end of several scenes. Yeah. But I think some scenes, we talked about this the other day, is that some scenes are more one than the other. Like it's more hook, almost like the whole scene's a hook.
Yeah.
But it could be both. It could be a hook, and then it could also have a cliffhanger to drive you to the next scene. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I read a books that are just cliffhanger scenes or chapters, whichever one you want to label it. Those are super fast books. I read a book like last year where every scene or chapter ended on a cliffhanger.
Right.
And so you just want to like push and push and push to the next scene, and they don't really get a break. So if every scene is a cliffhanger, then you're going to exhaust your reader. I think at some point they're going to be like, "Oh my God, I got to put this book down, but I don't want to do it."
Right.
Well,
that's assuming your cliffhanger worked. If your cliffhanger works, it's pretty cool. But if you just got annoying cliffhangers,
and that's the thing. Like, you put if the cliffhanger is relevant to the story, then okay, I see it. But if you're just putting in cliffhangers to put in cliffhangers, then eventually that process of writing your book is going to get old because
no variance.
Yeah,
mix it up. I read a book, I think it's by Remy and Brown, and it's called Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. And it talked about immediate scenes. Oh, I can't get back to my blow. It talked about immediate scenes versus narrative summary. And if you read Or you talk to any writer, we all talk about show, don't tell,
Right.
which is good advice, but you can almost show there's a place for narrative summary, I guess is what they were saying.
Mm-hmm.
An example I think they used was if like you're writing like Friday Night Lights or something like that, where you have a whole bunch of football games, you don't have to describe every football game in detail. You can say, they played this game and they won the championship, and then move on if it's not critical.
Right.
There's a place for narrative summary, and there's a
Well,
place
that's like saying if your team just played the football game and won, but whatever happened in the game is not relevant or doesn't. Anything could have happened in the game, and your story is going to be the same. But if your quarterback gets sacked and breaks his leg, that would be integral to the story, and you would want maybe not the entire game, but that scene of the game, so you can describe that scene at one point. Come into the scene and say, we're at halftime or whatever, they snap the ball, he gets sacked, he breaks his leg, and then follow him to the hospital or follow him out of the scene, and you don't actually have to go play by play.
Right, and that would be on topic for us today, keeping the scene relevant.
Right.
That would be relevant. Whereas just showing every game in the season because you felt like some sort of weird obligation to like chronicle the thing, you're making like a work of nonfiction.
Right.
Where you just showing what happened every single day. So it's not true life.
No, and have you ever seen, there was a show talking about football. There was a show called Friday Night Lights.
Yeah. There's a series, I think. I haven't watched it.
Yeah, it's a series, and my wife and I watched the whole series a couple years ago, and it was like I want to say the first season, maybe even the first 2 seasons, focused on the players and on the coach and the school and all that, and they showed a few games, but I mean, they played a whole season. Like basically every season was a football season or a school year or whatever.
Well, that would make sense.
Yeah.
I think that was based on a book called Friday Night Lights, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think I read that book years ago. It's actually not a new book.
No, it's old. But the thing I was trying to say is that they'll show a couple of the games. But even when they show a couple of the games, they only show highlights of the games.
Right.
And it's the whole show is based on football, but when you look at the time that they spent on the actual game of football, like it's not in a 45-minute episode, they might have 5 minutes of football, and the rest of it is all character and everything that goes on around the game of football.
Yeah. Remember, I think last night we were trying to come up with examples for scenes that were not relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought of one while you're telling that story. And it's my best example probably was, have you seen what was the last big budget Superman movie?
Yeah, the Man of Steel.
It's like 3.5 hours long. And it started out pretty interesting to me, and you may love it. I don't know if people may love it. But by the end, I was like, well, this please end. And I have to watch a show all the way to the end.
Yeah.
I was like falling asleep, and there are like buildings exploding and people getting thrown, and there was just nothing but useless, non-relevant scenes in there. It was like an action scene. I had heard somebody describe writing as there's a point where kind of like the towards the resolution of the book where it's like the car chase to the end. Well, that Superman movie was a car chase or the equivalent of a car chase, like for like 2/3, and it was just nothing but action. And I was like, how many buildings do we have on the planet Earth that can be destroyed? And
at what point
I was so bored.
Do we start getting negative returns in the social commentary when we're just destroying the city? I felt the same way. I thought it was kind of overdone, like they were trying to make it like this big epic deal instead of a Superman movie. Here, a Superman movie, in my opinion, is just should be a superhero action movie, like the Avengers. The Avengers do this very well. It's a superhero action movie. They have character development, but it's not like. And then they have the separate movies, like Iron Man, Thor, and all that, and they build character, but it's not overdone. And I think Superman, they went for some reason they tried to make it like some kind of epic, sweeping personal drama, and it's not. It's just a superhero movie. So you have 2 hours of building the character, which I thought was, I mean, the way they built the character was pretty good. I thought,
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed probably the first third of the movie where they're building up to it. But once he kind of made his appearance, I guess, as Superman, it was just like a big.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but like,
I like fight scenes.
Well, I do too. But like you said, how many fight scenes can you have to end a movie? You have one fight scene, and it ended on that. Superman had like 800 fight scenes at the end of the movie, and he destroyed like millions and millions of dollars worth of stuff, which really isn't millions and millions of dollars. It's all fake. But
millions of dollars, lots of money.
But I mean, yeah, you could have shrunk that entire interaction between Zed and Superman into a 5 or even a 10-minute, which is still long in my opinion, scene. Kind of like
write a screenplay. One page is supposed to be 1 minute of screen time.
Yeah.
So
have you ever seen
10 minutes would be 10 pages.
Right. Have you ever seen the last Matrix movie?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Anyway, him and Smith have this showdown at the end of the movie where they fight each other. And it's probably a good 10 minutes long of fighting, but it's up and down. Like you have breaks in the fighting a little bit that give them some time to kind of figure out what's going on, and then
it can be done.
Well, yeah. And what I said, like I say, the Superman one was very long, and when you do that in a writing situation, you get into where people are just like skipping it. They're just going through to see who's going to win the battle.
There's Mark Lucas.
Well, he joined a while ago, but he's gone already.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I never paid attention to the comics. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
So I think when we're talking about scenes, scenes should have some kind of a specific goal, I think.
Right.
Whether it's, obviously if it's pushing the plot or pushing the character, pushing something about it. But I think those best scenes push several different things at the same time. So you're not wasting.
You got to put somebody in conflict. You got to have somebody or something that is going to happen that you either want to happen or not to happen.
Yeah.
Stuff. And so,
I think if you can push character and plot, and sometimes multiple characters and plot in the same scene, then you've got a pretty decent scene, in my opinion.
And you could have a scene that introduces a new character. I'm making notes. I'm going in here. Driving the plot forward, introduce conflict. Maybe describe the setting, depending on where you're at. I know that we talked about Brandon Sanderson last time, where he talks about the rate in which you explain your story world, where some of them you learn everything about the story world like in the first scene. It's like, bam, here's all this information about the scene.
Right.
And other stories where it takes, several scenes or several chapters to kind of learn what you need to know to understand the story. And then once you get to that point, then you understand the story. And so you could have scenes that advance you towards that goal, towards understanding the story world, setting the setting.
Well, that's the thing. When you use scenes, and I used to do this a lot in my books, and hopefully I don't do it a whole lot anymore, but, they talk about info dumping and overused exposition and stuff. If you, in my opinion, if you have a scene, you can have a little bit of exposition describing that scene, that specific, the lights were dim, there was 2 chairs in a room, or he sat on one of the 2 chairs in a room, or whatever. But when you use an entire scene to info dump the rest of the book, like you're saying, in a Sanderson, you get every scene, you get enough to know what's going on in the scene, but you also get a little bit of the overall picture. And if you can drop little sprinkles of overall picture into every scene that you're doing, and your knowledge of the world builds as you read the book, I think that's a more immersive experience than just saying, "Oh, we'll tell you everything about the world in one big shot, and that way you know." But part of
You
one.
can't remember everything anyway. If you had a scene that had everything you needed to know about a complex fantasy or sci-fi novel,
Right.
you'd have to keep referring back to it.
Right. And you'd have to repeat yourself, and you probably will repeat yourself. I mean, he repeated himself a lot in the book just so you understood what was going on. But
I just started Mistborn.
oh, did you?
He does a lot of his information sharing through dialogue.
Yes.
It's not
And
my
it's not like
favorite thing, but as his stories always, to me, it takes me a while to start getting into it. But once I do, I get locked into the story.
well, and that's the thing. About dialogue and scene exposition. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. Like you were saying the other day, you could have the maid and the butler talking.
Oh, by the way, the master's away. I think there's going to be something happening now.
Yeah, as you know, the master's been cheating on the
As you know, the Death Star's approaching Alderaan.
Yeah, that's a horrible way to do it, but it can also be done very well. You can also have like very long scenes that do very little, or very short scenes that do a whole lot. Like you mentioned, Harry Bosch novels. I've read the first one,
Right.
The Black Ice, and his. Like I kept trying to figure out. Like I kept reading the scenes, and they were so. Like some books I've read, you get a lot of. You don't think that it's relevant to the story, but it ends up being relative to the story. And in a Harry Bosch novel, when you read it, you're like, oh yeah, that's specifically relevant, and I understand why it's relevant, and it makes sense that he's doing that.
Yeah.
And then at the back of my head, I'm like, what? But how is he going to fill up a whole novel like this? But he does.
He has some scenes, and I think they're necessary. But he does some, and it's almost intimidating because I wanted to write like a cop story set in L.A., but I felt like I didn't know enough about the L.A. Police Department.
Right.
Despite all of my other experience in reading. Like he'll describe the drive into the mountains there and the geography, and it just feels so real, like you're there. So he'll spend some pretty significant scenes setting, the environment, so you can like visualize it. But most of his stuff is very much, in a non-obvious way, moves the plot and gets you into the characters. Because I started listening to the Harry Bosch novels on accident. Remember, at the time I was listening to audiobooks I could get free from the library, and I kept seeing them, and I read the description of them, and I was like, that just sounds like a typical Hollywood cop movie. And then I realized now that probably most of those movies are made from spin-offs of his books. But I didn't download it for a long time, and finally I downloaded it because I just couldn't get another book I wanted, and then I listened to the Black Echo. His first one.
Maybe that. I said the Black Ice, but I meant the Black Echo.
It's one of those, but
maybe
like,
no. There's
There's
two. The Black Ice and the Black Echo. Maybe that's.
Yeah, they're 1 and 2, but I can't remember which one's first. But I remember
Black
listening.
Echo's first.
Yeah, and that was just amazing. Like, changed my writing experience for years. And about the same time, this is a little bit off of the subject, but about the same time, that's how I came across Game of Thrones. I hadn't been into fantasy for a long time.
Yeah.
I kept seeing it there. I was like, maybe it's okay. And I finally listened to it, and I was like, oh, wow. This changes everything. Winter is coming. Anyway, so scenes. Do you have a favorite scene you're working on now, or one that's giving you problems? When he needs to cut. But
I had that first Wendy scene where we meet her in the past. That I still don't like it.
Scene. Well, I mean, I know you didn't like the very first part, but what you had me beta read for it. There's some good stuff in there. But,
I liked the back half of the scene. The front half of the scene, I'm sure it's better than I think it is.
It's going pretty good.
I put the pre-alpha version up for some critiques on this Facebook page that we're a part of, and some of the critiques I got back weren't. I mean, they were kind of like some guy telling me, you know, hey, you should do this. But this that he was telling me to do was like, you know, when you listen to authors say, don't do this in your first book, that's everything that guy was. That's everything that guy was telling me to do.
Yeah, that's narrative dumping. Put more adverbs in there.
So well, and like the scene basically is one of my characters, Wendy, and this is my book, Shadows of Neverland, which is book 3 in my Second Star series, which is basically Peter Pan and sci-fi, where Peter Pan's the bad guy for most of the book.
Awesome concept. I love it.
So all the characters in the book have references to Peter Pan, names and places and stuff like that. So Wendy is the leader of the Lost Boys, and in this particular book, in book 3, we get to see their journey to find help from what they call the First Ones, or the Red Leans. And while they're going on this journey to find those people, Wendy is telling John, who is someone from our world who got pulled into their world by accident, she's telling him basically how the Lost Boys came to be. So you get a present kind of journey story and a past how
Creation
everything
story,
happened story. And in this scene is the first scene in the past, and it's all told from Wendy's perspective, and it's how she got there. And Wendy and her family had been taken from our world, and somehow they escaped. We don't know how, but now she's in this, what I call skiffs, what are basically just like personal transport. And they're crashing, and that's how we come into the scene. They're crashing, they're screaming and panic and chaos, and we don't know why, and she doesn't know why.
Sparks and flames.
Yeah. And so basically the first line is something like she can't see because her eyes are filled with tears, and her sister's screaming, and that's it. That's the first line. And the first paragraph is basically her being jarred around inside the skiff.
It's going down.
It's going down, and so one of the tips, one of the criticisms that I had from this guy was basically,
Start in the middle of the action.
Well, he said you have a sentence that starts in the middle of the action, but then you want to give the reader some kind of a base. So you want to say they were crashing, and then say they had been en route from such and such to such and such, and it had been a good flight so far, and now everything was going to shit. Well, obviously everything's going to shit. I don't need to tell anybody that it's going to shit.
And that's literally telling.
Yeah.
You just tell me what's happening, and instead of showing me what's happening. I can see they're crashing. I don't really need to know. Are they crashing? It looks like they might be crashing.
Well, was everything fine before they started crashing? Who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, right now, the point of the scene is that they're crashing, and you know, he was like, we just want a little bit of information because I don't understand what's going on here. And I'm like, that's the point. The point is you don't understand, and the point is you want to read more so you figure out what's happening. And not so if I go into it, like, for instance, we'll talk about Mistborn because we're probably going to talk about it for a few episodes because it's a good book. But
I'm in the middle of it.
The first chapter or prologue or whatever of the Final Empire is an obligator and somebody else looking out over these Ska slaves. And all these names are like, what does this even mean? I don't understand. Why is there slaves? Is this like Egypt? I don't understand.
What's all this ash?
Yeah, I don't know, understand why the sky is filled with ash. Why are there slaves? Like, what are they doing? What's obligators? Whatever, right? And you're like, I don't understand what any of this is going on. But I read to figure out what's going on. If Sanderson would have said, an obligator works for the Inquisitors, and the Inquisitors work for the Lord Ruler, and blah, 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 and this is what they did, and this is why there's ash falling on the ground, why would I want to read the rest of the book?
Right. There's nothing. There's no mystery. There's no sense of discovery.
And honestly, you don't find out why there's ash until like the second book.
Yeah,
it just is there.
Yeah.
That's what
when you were talking earlier, it reminded me of when you're talking about the critique and the feedback. Because I've had the same experience. You get different things. Some people think it's too much. You'll get one person that says, you need to tell us more what's going on. And the next person will tell you, no, you need to start with more action. But I think some of it comes back to like reader tolerances. Mm-hmm. Because some people have a high tolerance for their suspension of disbelief, or however you want to say it. And they can anticipate something is going to happen. And some people, if you make them impatient or they're confused or frustrated, they're going to just eject from the book. Now, not me, because any book I start, I have to finish, and it's like a horrible curse. And that's why I'm so far behind in my reading. I've read some.
Oh, not books. Me, man. I get about if I get 20% into a book, and it's not. If I'm just reading it because I've got it, I'll stop reading it. There's several books on my Kindle that I'm like, nope.
Yeah, I have a few that I and then I kind of do the halfway thing where like. I won't eject from it, but I'll start reading something else. I have like 9 books going at once. But yeah, I have a hard time. Jen gives me a hard time about movies because, like, what was the movie? What was the one with the chainsaw? It was a cult movie years ago.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
No, it was like something to darkness. It was real spoofy.
Army of Darkness.
Army of Darkness. And I watched the whole thing, and she was
when he's got a chainsaw on his hand. It's like, no.
Yeah. He has this. He was like, "Let me show you my boomstick," and he gets out the shotgun or something. And I don't really remember much about the movie, but I remember I watched the whole thing, and she was like, "That's time we'll never get back."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you know that that movie was pretty. It was pretty funny for what it. If you watch it for what it is, I mean, it's not spectacular. Right.
But so the reader tolerances, I guess that's loosely related to what we're talking about. But when you're talking about keeping the scene relevant, there's some. Well, we talk about Stephen King. He's got lots of scenes that are completely irrelevant. He's probably got whole books and series that are relevant to the story. But I have a high tolerance for his diversions because they're awesome. And I just said my word. I after watching our Blabcast or whatever you want to call it from last week, I circled on my notes of things to talk about in this show, and I wrote awesome, and I drew a line through it because I said that a lot.
Yeah.
So I need a new word.
Awesome.
It's spectacular.
I say it all the time. Like, that's pretty awesome.
It's fantastic.
I like that.
That's pretty outstanding. Get out my thesaurus. But anyway, so let's see.
Well, when you talk about Stephen King, like I made a note last night about talking about the gunslinger in that first scene, and I think it's and several authors can do this. I just can't think of anything that jumps out at me more than this first scene. But basically, when a scene means something when you read it the first time, and then if you finish the book or a series of books and you go back and read it again and it means something completely different, that's a fantastic scene. And King did that very well.
Layered levels of
depth. You know, in the first scene, and we talked about this last night a little bit, where you know he says that the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed, and then you have a line here. I'll look it up real quick.
Why? But you should add more of what had happened before that, and why did
why
is this guy fleeing across the desert? I don't understand.
Why is he in the middle of the desert?
What kind of desert is it? Is it a desert in our world or some other world? Is it daytime or nighttime? Or I need to know more. I'm not reading this book till I learn all the answers.
So I'll read this portion real quick, and so it said the gunslinger had been struck by momentary dizziness, a kind of yawing sensation that made the entire world seem ephemeral, almost a thing that could be looked through. It passed, and like the world upon whose height he walked, he moved on. And then there's several other references
I'm about 90% sure that wasn't the first. Could you say that's an updated version?
This is the revised and expanded throughout. So I don't know if that was actually the very first scene or not. But when you read that second line, it passed, and like the world whose hide he walked, he moved on. And when you're talking about the dizziness and all that stuff, when you read it the first time, spoiler alert, when you read it the first time, it's like, oh, okay, well, he's just kind of out of it because he's in the middle of the desert and he's just walking.
He's a drunk gunslinger.
Yeah. But when you read it the second time, you're like, holy shit, he just stepped through the door at the top of the Dark Tower and now he's starting all over again.
Right.
And that, man, when I read it the second time, I had goosebumps. So if you can write a scene like that, not every scene is going to be like that. There are several scenes in the Gunslinger saga that I'm like, oh my God, come on, let's go.
Well,
kind of like, almost like the entire Song of Susanna book, or like half of Wolves of the Kala. I'm like, come on. Come on. I don't want to read about throwing plates anymore. Let's get on with the damn story.
Right. Oh yeah, I mean, because there are some of my favorite parts. I mean, I like a lot of the kind of the Western element in I think it's Wolves of the Kala, but the book was kind of long. The one that wore me out was the beach. The drawing of the three.
Oh,
they're walking along the beach for like 900 pages, and they got the crabs, and then he needs to eat some. Yeah, and I was like, wow, but that was also different because I listened to the first one, The Gunslinger, on audiobook, but they didn't have a lot of audiobooks back then, so we went on a trip. So we're driving to Nebraska, and then so my mom and me would take turns reading it back and forth to each other.
Oh,
so
nice.
So it was a little bit different. It was fun, actually. An awesome childhood memory, but so it was a little bit different. And I think the first book that I listened to was actually read by Stephen King. He read his own work. Or there was a book I read or listened to him because he talked about reading his own work, and it wasn't bad, but better than I would have done.
I want to say that Frank Mueller read the first in the series. Yeah, Frank Mueller read all the way through the Wastelands, I think, and then after the Wastelands, somebody else picked it up and started reading it. I can't remember.
Bob's here.
Uh-oh.
There's trouble.
He read through the Looking Glass, the fourth book. Well, not the fourth book, but it's like the eighth book, but it's a in-betweener. Apparently he read that one and everybody hated it. Like they couldn't stand his voice at all. They were like, please don't ever read an audiobook again, ever.
Yeah. I've had that happen with little owl dancer join. Awesome. Hello. How's it going?
Oh,
yeah, I know, and I'm real particular about audiobook narrators and stuff. The Game of Thrones is read by Roy Dotrice, who I like and I used to. But the thing about his reading that gets me a little bit is all of his characters sound old.
Yeah,
it's like Arya's like 9 or something, and sounds like an old lady. But I really liked it. And then Tom Lee read, I think, the fourth book, and he's good. He read Pillars of Earth and some of those, and he's one of my favorites too. But it was quite a difference. Kind of set me off. So
we've talked about good scenes. Do you have any examples of bad scenes that you've read?
Bad scenes. We went off on our Superman, John. I'm trying to think of bad scenes in a book, and maybe it's hard to remember them because they just wear you out. I guess a while back I tried to. I don't know if that's really relevant, but I thought maybe I should try to learn how to write a romance. I was reading Nora Roberts, obviously, because she's a big one. And there was just a lot of nothing in some of the scenes in the book I was reading. I was reading Jewels of the Sun. I was like, wow, this is making me tired. But that's maybe a different show.
Well, I'm listening to the audiobook version of Altered Carbon by Richard K. Morgan. and it's basically a cyberpunk sci-fi story, and like all the ones from when it was written, it's got a lot of futuristic technology at the time, but it's not futuristic anymore.
Right.
But anyway, it's a fairly good book. But there's a scene in there, and I'm listening to an audiobook. So there's a scene in there where him and this ultra rich guy that has hired him to, basically this ultra rich guy is killed in the beginning, before the book starts, and everybody thinks that it was a suicide. But the way that the book reads, you can get what they call re-sleeved, which when you download your consciousness into this other deal, you get re-sleeved into another body, whatever. So yeah, so this guy, he hires this guy, Kovac, to come and investigate his death. And at like chapter 15 or 16, he goes back to his hotel room, and the dude's wife is there. And the wife gives him this drug, and I can't remember what it's called, but they both take this drug, and basically it's like ecstasy on steroids. Like if you took ecstasy and then took overdosed, and it's basically like you can feel, hey Darren, you can feel the sensations that your sexual partner is feeling. But then
it's a great place to come into the conversation.
Yeah.
We're talking about scenes that were not necessary or something.
Anyway, so he goes on, and for a minute I'm thinking it's an erotica novel, because I'm like, this is so, I don't understand why it's so gratuitous. Like why I almost turned it off, fast forward through it, because I got embarrassed. I was like, who's listening and thinking that I'm listening to this smut like I'm reading 50 Shades of Grey, but this is a sci-fi novel.
Right.
And it went on literally. Well, it was an audio book, so it couldn't skip through it, but it was probably 5 minutes long, 5 or 7 minutes long, this scene of them getting after it, nasty getting after it. And I'm like, I don't want, why, what is it?
But the Harry Met Sally scene there in the diner in the middle of Star Wars.
Oh yeah, but way worse. If Sally had gotten naked on that table in the middle of the bar, and they just got the nasty done right there, and everybody's looking at them like, what's going on? That would have been like a hint of what this scene was like.
Wow.
And when you sit back and think about it, what's the point of the scene?
For that particular story in that genre, that scene is probably enough. Now, other stories, obviously, it might make more sense, but yeah, that would be kind of jarring. I've never seen that in a sci-fi.
Yeah, neither have I.
Facebook page, and they were asking about a scene with some sexual overtones and how to handle it. And most of the people who commented were like, it's more about the setup for, and that's the same that's true in romance, is it's more the setup for the scene than the actual scene. That's what differentiates romance from erotica.
Right.
And so maybe that should have been one where if it was important to the story, it should have faded to black or.
Yeah, it all happened, and then they did the nasty, and then move on. I don't need to know all that other stuff. Just leave it out. I can imagine.
And they were freaks, and then they moved on.
Yeah, so that popped into my mind as a bad scene, or an unneeded scene that doesn't really do anything except up your word count and then embarrass your readers. I'm really glad that my daughter wasn't, because I listen to audiobooks on my way to work, and I have to take my daughter to daycare on my way to work, and I'm really glad that scene was playing after work, because I was on my way home. Otherwise, I would have been like, my daughter's in the back seat, I can't listen to this.
I've had to turn off some audiobooks. My kids, hey, let's listen to an audiobook on the way to Nebraska or wherever, and then I'm like, oh, maybe not. So
they do have a rating system on audible.com.
It's for content.
There's performance, content, and overall story, I think, that you can rate the 3. Oh yeah, well, it on Kindle, if you read a book, you just give it 5 stars or whatever you're going to give it. On Audible, you can give it ratings 5 stars.
PG or NC-17.
No, they don't. They don't. Yeah, they should.
When you put something on CreateSpace, I think there's a deal where you have to choose whether it's suited for certain audiences, and I've always struggled with that because like my Dragon Badge books and stuff, they're like an action movie. There's plenty of violence and language in there, and I'm like, is that appropriate for what age group? I don't know.
For people that are going to listen later, if they're not watching live, Darren was asking about a rating system on Audible, where like if something's PG or R or X, and yeah, they don't necessarily do that. I think on, I'll have to look it up on Amazon really quick, but I think you can label it as an adult, but I don't think that there's an actual content warning for.
I think that's important in books in general. They talk about that, about the cover, and then the book description should give you an idea. You don't want to be surprised by what's in that. I mean, most of the ones that are erotica, you can tell by looking at them. There's something going on in there. But if you get a book that has like a cartoon character, kind of like a like with the Star Wars animated series that's on Disney now. If your cover looks like that, and then you get the scene that you just described in the middle of it, then I would probably have to report that book, because that's wow.
Yeah. Well, like Darren just said, YA books. Hunger Games was YA, and you read Hunger Games, and you're like, they're murdering children. They're murdering children.
That's a great topic for kids.
Oh, YA. And in the movie, you get a little bit of the watered down version of that story. But in the book, you're like, oh my God, you just threw a spear through that 5-year-old's face. What is going on? This is not YA.
Yeah, the book is a lot harsher than the movie, I think. And that's the way it is in most stories. If you really look at the concept of that, but
I've just pulled up Altered Carbon on Amazon to see if there's any warnings or anything like that, and there isn't. And I think I actually think when I do my books on KDP, there's a box that you can check for adult content, which
that's what I'm talking about, because
I'm not sure how that, like, I'm not sure if you're supposed to do that for, like, if it's erotica, you click adult content, because a lot of books, cursing is in most books, but I don't think that they're labeled adult content. I don't know, but you're right. They should have some kind of a.
It's Altered Carbon. That's the book that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's I'm still getting used to following the comments, so I'm trying to say hi to everybody. It's awesome to have people here.
Let me look. I want to look it up on Audible and see what it says on.
Because like I know that it says, does this book have adult content? So like, would a graphic murder scene be adult content? Would a shootout? Would like a Die Hard movie? If you wrote a Die Hard movie in a book, would you click the adult content, or do people that are looking for adult content, are they looking for basically pornography or erotica?
Right.
And it doesn't really specify which is which. So it's kind of like, let your conscience be your guide. I'm hoping that with Amazon, you can, and I've done this a few times, you can return the book if you don't like it. But like I said, I normally have to finish a book. The only time I haven't, where I've returned a book to Amazon, is I sat down to read it, and it took me 9 minutes. And I was like, this book's only like 8 pages, or not 8 pages long, but it was 9 minutes worth of reading. And I was like, it's not a book. That's a problem. That's maybe a different episode.
Yeah.
For us to talk about pseudo books that people are publishing.
I looked Altered Carbon up on Audible, and there aren't any warnings on that either. Although the first review in 2007, which has 31 helpful yeses on it, the first word is sex.
We'll call it Clue. Clue phone's ringing. Let me pick it up.
It says Altered Carbon, sex, violence, and drugs become a strange brew. So I guess if you were to read that review, you'd say, oh, okay, there's sex in there. Maybe.
And it's a sci-fi book?
It is a sci-fi book, yeah.
It's an interesting description for a sci-fi book.
Yeah.
So maybe they thought sex sells.
Yeah, well, it does. I mean, have you ever read a Peter Hamilton book? Holy crap! You talk about like unneeded gratuitous sex,
like the tentacle porn and all that stuff.
Tentacle porn.
If that's what I'm thinking of. I only read one. No, not Peter Hamilton. It's I'm thinking of another Hamilton, and she writes erotica, and I remember there's all kinds of monsters and stuff in it. And there's like monsters having sex and stuff. I was like, wow, that's not what I thought it was. But
yeah. So, well, now that we have some audience members, I assume you guys are readers. Do you have any?
The topic we started out this talking about writing, about keeping a scene relevant to the story. So we're looking for examples of scenes where they just didn't serve the purpose of the either book or movie or whatever.
So we've had some good scenes where I can't remember if you were here or not, but we were talking about the opening to The Gunslinger, where that scene serves two purposes. When you read it the first time, it means something, and then when you read it the second time, it means the same thing, but also you look at it a completely different light, where it could mean two different things. Or when a scene pushes just character or just plot or both.
Unfortunately, I've read books that are like the entire book is full of unneeded scenes, but I'll read it to the end anyway, and then I'll wonder why it didn't satisfy me as a reading experience, and then probably because it all sucked. But
yeah, well, that's like we mentioned Game of Thrones earlier, and you have in the first couple of books you have, I think, 4, maybe 5 specific main character viewpoints that you jump in between, but there's I don't even know how many side characters that are involved in those scenes, and every single one of those side characters have their own plots that when you look at what they're doing in the scene, they're doing their own thing. Like you could follow their...
Right. It could be its own book.
Well, yeah, the scene is meant for Ned Stark, and he's
and let's talk, and it's related to unnecessary scenes is I believe that George R.R. Martin, he talks about being a gardener or a builder as far as how you write plot.
It's gardener or architect.
Gardener or architect, and so basically that's like, do you write just like just go by your imagination, or do you plan it out? And he doesn't plan it out, but he has lots of characters in related scenes that are duplicate characters. Like he has kind of an archetype of like Sandor Clegane, the dog, and the 2 or 3 other characters are like the big powerful warriors that kill everybody. And if you read all 5 of the books and you look, there's several of those characters, and they're just kind of like repeats of the same characters, almost the same storyline, even though I like them all. I mean, I like all those books, but
right.
So those are, I'm not sure how some of those scenes push the story forward.
You know, a lot of the scenes that a lot of the scenes do, but I like the, it's almost easier to watch. Well, I don't know how 5 and 6 are going to, 5 diverged a little bit from the narrative.
Season 5?
Yeah.
Of Game of Thrones? I haven't bought it. I thought about it. I can't decide if I'm going to watch it or not.
But when you, like, I started reading book 2. Let me just say that the first book in season 1 of Game of Thrones are almost identical in the way that they present the story, up into like Ned's point of view to what's the kid's name? Bran. Like they follow the story, and the first season of Game of Thrones follows the narrative of the book almost exactly. But like I started reading book 2, and the first prologue of book 2 is this maester who's going in to talk to Stannis in his office, where he's got the big table map of Westeros.
Westeros, yeah.
And it's a ridiculously long chapter. Ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
And you could have like cut out all that stuff. I mean, probably, I don't know how many pages it was because I'm listening to it on audiobook, but I mean, I'm 30 something minutes into the chapter or into that prologue, and they haven't done really anything. Like they're just walking around.
The whole Stannis storyline is not really my favorite, I guess.
Yeah. But so, like you were talking about, what we talked about earlier, the Harry Bosch scenes, where you could see how every scene is specifically designed to forward the narrative, and he doesn't have a lot of scenes that are just filler scenes. Every scene in Harry Bosch,
and that's part of the genre too. That kind of murder mystery thriller genre is much more plot centric. I think everything's got to be everything. Whereas in fantasy and epic fantasy in particular, there's a lot of exploring the story world is a big part of the genre. So well, we're getting almost an hour, so we probably start wrapping up some closing thoughts and see how we're doing. So the topic of this one was keeping the scenes relevant, and we started out identifying that a scene is basically the definition of a scene, as I look at it, is where something happens, something changes. I mean, I guess there's lots of books I've read where nothing really changes. Right. And that's where you just get this kind of ongoing drone, kind of like the Superman. Nothing's changing. It's just the same action over and over again.
Yep.
And then your scene's got to be related to your story or central theme or whatever. So
yeah, you definitely want to make a concerted effort to have your scenes do something for your book. You know, if they're a character building scene, then build 2 or 3 characters. Don't just build one character.
Or build one and then add layers to the other one or something like that.
Exactly. Build the character, build the narrative structure of your plot. Do several things with your scenes instead of just having a scene where he goes to the ice cream store and has ice cream and then discovers he doesn't like ice cream. You can do a whole lot with that scene than just saying, describing him eating ice cream and then, I don't like ice cream.
Yeah.
So I think we could wrap it up there. And
the last thought which you just said made me think of is that I think keeping your scenes relevant because I started out as being a pantser, and I still kind of lean towards just writing that way by the seat of the pants. But doing a little more plotting or planning a little bit, or kind of at least knowing where your story is going is going to help you keep your scenes relevant.
Right. Yeah,
and that's
definitely.
That I've struggled with. I'm getting better at it though.
Well, and then if you outline your whole book and you can go back and see that scenes that you thought were going to be relevant to the story, they're not anymore, and you can cut those out without writing them. Right. And then you're not wasting a whole time.
Save some time, or put them in a different book or different story. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, I'm Scott Moon. My webpage is scottmoonwriter.com.
I'm Josh Hayes. My website is joshhayeswriter.com. And we are Keystroke Medium, and this was The Right Stuff Episode 2, Keeping Scenes Relevant. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
We have a YouTube channel now. So
we do have a YouTube channel, and I think if you just Google I don't know if we have a strict URL for it or not.
Yeah, you have to do you have to have 100 followers before you can get a cleaner URL.
Go search for The Right Stuff. It's the Keystroke Medium. And you can find it on either one of our websites, and go subscribe if you want to do that. And then we'll plan on doing a new show every Friday morning. So if you want to come back in next Friday, we're going to be talking about, I'm not sure.
What's the next topic on here?
The next topic is, should have had this up and ready, but I did not. I think the next topic is going to be ideas that make full stories, or ideas that don't make good stories, and maybe we can throw a couple other things in that. So that's tentatively going to be our subject for next week.
A good one. Maybe we could even do an example, build one up, build up a concept.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm gonna sign off, and I'll see you next time.
All right.
Yeah.